Nobody wants this old resort, Amanda said, tossing the property photos across our parents' dining room table. It's practically worthless now, but my timeshare conversion plan will make us millions. I sat quietly, sipping my coffee, watching my sister perform her usual act of confident expertise. At 32, Amanda had never actually succeeded in any of her grand business ventures, but that hadn't diminished our family's blind faith in her abilities. My name is Michael Sullivan, and at 35, I'd spent the last decade being the responsible but unambitious son, at least in my family's eyes. While Amanda chased one failed scheme after another, I'd quietly built a successful investment portfolio, though my family dismissed my work as playing it safe. The property in question was the Ocean View Resort, a once prestigious beachfront hotel that our grandfather had built from nothing. For 40 years it had been the crown jewel of the coast, hosting celebrities and politicians, until a combination of neglect and changing tourist patterns had left it struggling. The timeshare market is booming, Amanda continued, pulling out glossy mock-ups of her proposed renovation. We just need to convince Dad to sign over his ownership rights, and I've already got investors lined up. Our father nodded approvingly, ever ready to support Amanda's latest venture. It makes sense, he said, looking at our mother for confirmation. The old place has been bleeding money for years. At least this way it stays in the family, sort of. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent the last 6 months quietly acquiring controlling interest in the resort. Every share my grandfather had distributed to distant relatives, every piece of the property that had been parceled out over the years. I'd tracked down and purchased them all. The investors are ready to move fast, Amanda said, her voice taking on that familiar urgent tone she used when pushing for quick decisions. We just need to act before the property loses any more value. I took another sip of coffee, thinking about the construction crews already on standby, the permits secured, the plans drawn up by one of the best hospitality architects in the business. 6 months of careful preparation, all leading to this moment. Actually, I said, speaking for the first time since Amanda had started her presentation, I think there might be a problem with that plan. Amanda barely glanced at me, used to dismissing my input. No offense, Michael, but what would you know about property development? You push paper at an investment firm. Our mother gave me her usual placating smile. Honey, your sister has put a lot of thought into this. She knows what she's doing. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a particular email. The problem is, the majority shareholder might have other plans for the property. That got their attention. Amanda's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? Dad owns controlling interest. Not anymore, I said calmly, turning my phone to show them the ownership documentation. As of last month, I own 67% of Ocean View Resort. The silence that followed was deafening. My father snatched the phone, staring at the screen in disbelief. Amanda's face had gone pale, her carefully crafted presentation forgotten. This isn't possible, she sputtered. How could you? I've spent the last 6 months buying shares from every family member who wanted to sell. It wasn't difficult, most of them had written the place off as worthless, just like you did. Our father looked up from the phone, his expression a mix of shock and anger. Why would you do this? Your sister has a plan to save the resort. No, I said firmly, she has a plan to strip it for parts and sell it off piece by piece to timeshare investors. But I have a different vision. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my own set of plans. Real plans, backed by years of market research and careful financial modeling. The renderings showed a completely reimagined Ocean View Resort, one that honored its historic character while bringing it firmly into the modern era. The resort doesn't need to be carved up into timeshares, I explained, laying out the documents. It needs proper investment and management. I've already secured $50 million in renovation funding, hired a top-tier hospitality management team, and obtained all necessary permits for restoration. Amanda was shaking her head, her voice taking on the condescending tone she'd perfected over the years. You're in over your head, Michael. This kind of project requires experience, connections, like the experience you gained from your failed yoga studio, or the connections you made during your 3-month career as a social media influencer. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but years of being underestimated had left their mark. That's enough, our father interrupted. Michael, this is ridiculous. You can't just swoop in and take over. This is a family business. Exactly, I replied. And I'm family. I'm also the majority shareholder, and I'm not going to stand by and watch another one of Amanda's schemes destroy what grandfather built. I stood up, gathering my materials. The renovation begins next week. You're welcome to stay involved. There's still plenty of room for family participation, but it will be on my terms, with my vision. As I headed for the door, Amanda called out, her voice trembling with rage. You'll regret this, my investors, your investors. I cut in, the Henderson Group. I met with them last week. They're actually investing in my renovation plan now. Turns out they prefer working with someone who has actual business experience and a solid financial track record. The look of shock on her face was almost worth all the years of being dismissed and undervalued. Almost. I have a meeting with the architects in an hour, I said, checking my watch. I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork, detailing the new ownership structure. Feel free to have your attorneys review it. As I walked to my car, I could hear Amanda's raised voice through the open window, no doubt trying to convince our parents that I was making a huge mistake. But for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely certain about my path. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Despite my family's initial resistance, the renovation project moved forward exactly as planned. The construction teams began work on schedule, carefully preserving the resort's historic features while modernizing its infrastructure. Amanda made several attempts to undermine the project, reaching out to my investors with dire warnings about my inexperience, even trying to file an injunction to stop the construction. Each attempt failed, largely because I documented everything meticulously and secured all necessary approvals well in advance. One morning, about a month into the renovation, I arrived at the resort to find my father waiting in the parking lot. He looked older somehow, less certain than the man who had always taken Amanda's side without question. Can we talk? He asked, gesturing toward the beach. We walked in silence for a few minutes, watching the construction crews work on the resort's iconic facade. Finally, he spoke. I've been looking over your plans, talking to some people in the industry. He paused, kicking at the sand. They're impressed. Actually, more than impressed. They say your vision for the resort could make it more successful than it ever was even in your grandfather's day. I waited, knowing there was more. I owe you an apology, he continued. I've spent so many years focusing on Amanda's potential that I never really saw yours. You were always so quiet about your accomplishments, so steady. That's why you never took me seriously. I finished for him. He nodded, looking out at the ocean. Your grandfather would be proud, you know. This is exactly the kind of careful, thoughtful development he believed in. Not quick schemes or trendy conversions, but real sustainable growth. For the first time since this all began, I felt something in my chest loosen. Thanks, Dad, that means a lot. Amanda's still angry, he added. She feels betrayed, says you stole her opportunity. Amanda's had plenty of opportunities, I replied. This one was mine. I earned it. He nodded slowly. Yes, you did, and maybe it's time we all recognize that. As we walked back toward the resort, I could see the project taking shape, not just the physical renovation, but the realization of a dream I'd held since childhood. The Ocean View Resort would rise again, not as a carved-up timeshare property, but as the grand hotel my grandfather had always intended it to be. And this time, no one would be able to dismiss my contribution as playing it safe. 3 months into the renovation, the Ocean View Resort was starting to show signs of its former glory. The worn facade had been restored to its original grandeur, the lobby's crystal chandeliers sparkled once again, and the beachfront cottages were being transformed into luxury suites that would command premium rates. But success, as I was learning, had a way of bringing old conflicts to the surface. I was reviewing progress reports in my temporary office, formerly the resort's old library, when my assistant knocked on the door. Mr. Sullivan, your sister's here. She's demanding to speak with you. I looked up to see Amanda already pushing her way past my assistant, dressed in what I recognized as her business warrior outfit. the one she wore when she was preparing for battle. You need to stop the renovation, she announced without preamble, slapping a folder on my desk. Your contractors are destroying the property's value. I picked up the folder, already knowing what I'd find inside. Another half-baked analysis, trying to prove my project was doomed to fail. This had become her new weekly routine. The renovation is proceeding exactly as planned, I replied calmly, not bothering to open the folder. We're actually ahead of schedule, and under budget. That's not the point. She leaned over my desk, her voice rising. My investors, they're not your investors anymore, Amanda. They never were. The Henderson Group signed with me because I had actual plans, not just glossy presentations and empty promises. Her face flushed red. You think you're so clever, don't you? Sneaking around, buying up shares behind everyone's back. But you're in over your head, Michael. This isn't like managing some investment portfolio. This is real business. I stood up slowly, my patience finally wearing thin. Real business. Like your failed organic juice bar, or maybe like that cryptocurrency you convinced Dad to invest in last year. How much did he lose on that one? Those were learning experiences, she snapped. No, those were failures. Expensive failures that our family kept covering for you. But this, I gestured to the construction visible through my window. This is real business. We have actual bookings coming in for next season. The renovation is on schedule. Our financing is secure. The timeshare market is saturated. I cut her off. Your plan would have turned this place into just another generic property. What made you think you could succeed where dozens of other timeshare conversions have failed? She straightened up, adjusting her designer blazer. Mom and Dad believe in my vision. Mom and Dad have been cleaning up your messes for years. It stops now. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from our father, coming by to see the progress, bringing potential investors. I showed Amanda the message. Dad's on his way with investors. Real ones. You're welcome to stay and see what actual progress looks like. She grabbed her folder and headed for the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. This isn't over, Michael. You may have won this round, but I'm not done. Yes, you are, I said quietly. You just don't know it yet. After she left, I walked down to the beach, needing a moment to clear my head. The afternoon sun glinted off the ocean, and I could see the progress being made on the beachfront cottages. My grandfather had built those himself, starting with just 2 units and expanding as the resort grew successful. I remembered helping him maintain them during summer breaks, learning about the business not through grand schemes or flashy presentations, but through actual work. He'd always said the key to success was in the details, understanding every aspect of your business from the ground up. 20 minutes later, I watched my father's car pull into the parking lot. He stepped out, followed by 3 men in business suits, the potential investors he'd mentioned. But it was the 4th person emerging from the car that caught my attention. My mother. She hadn't visited the property since I'd taken over, claiming it was too painful to watch the changes being made to her father's legacy. Seeing her now, taking in the restoration work with wide eyes, made my heart skip a beat. Michael, my father called out, waving me over. Come meet the gentleman from Pacific Coast Holdings. The next hour was spent giving a detailed tour of the property, explaining our vision and the progress made so far. The investors asked sharp, intelligent questions, exactly the kind of due diligence I'd expect from serious players in the industry. But I kept watching my mother from the corner of my eye. She walked slightly behind the group, running her hand along restored walls, pausing to look at old photos we'd preserved, taking in every detail of what we'd accomplished. As the tour concluded, the lead investor, a Mr. Davidson, pulled me aside. I'll be frank, Mr. Sullivan. We've seen a lot of hotel renovation projects, but what you're doing here is special. You're not just preserving a building, you're reviving a legacy. I nodded, thinking of my grandfather. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve. Pacific Coast Holdings would be interested in discussing a significant investment. Not to take over, mind you, but to help expand your vision. Perhaps even create a boutique chain of similar properties along the coast. Before I could respond, my mother stepped forward. Michael needs time to consider any offers, she said firmly. This isn't just a business decision, it's about family. I stared at her, surprised by both her intervention and her support. After the investors left, promising to send over a formal proposal, my mother lingered behind. We stood on the terrace overlooking the ocean, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Your grandfather would have loved this, she said softly. Not just the renovation, but the way you're doing it. Careful, thoughtful, building something meant to last. I learned from him, I replied. All those summers he had me working here, learning every aspect of the business. I paid attention. She turned to face me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I know you did. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. We were so caught up in Amanda's big dreams that we missed the quiet strength right in front of us. Amanda's dreams weren't the problem, I said. It was the lack of substance behind them. Everything was always about the quick win, the fast turnaround. But that's not how you build something meaningful. My mother reached out and squeezed my hand. No, it's not. And I think it's time we all acknowledged that. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another text, this time from Amanda. This isn't over. Hope you're ready for what comes next. I showed the message to my mother, who sighed deeply. She's always been like this, you know. Even as a child, if she couldn't have something, she'd try to destroy it. I know, I replied. That's why I've been documenting everything. Every threat, every attempt to interfere. My lawyers have quite a file built up. You really have thought of everything, haven't you? I smiled, thinking of all the careful planning that had led to this moment. I learned that from grandfather too. He always said success is in the details. As we walked back through the lobby, now gleaming with restored marble and polished brass, I could feel the weight of decades of family history around us. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a foundation, something strong and true to build upon. You know, my mother said as we reached her car, I always wondered why your grandfather spent so much time with you those summers. Now I understand. He saw something in you that the rest of us missed. She hugged me tightly before getting into her car, and I watched her drive away, thinking about how sometimes the quietest victories are the most meaningful ones. But Amanda's text lingered in my mind, a reminder that some battles weren't quite over yet. Whatever she was planning, I needed to be ready. A week after my mother's visit, I discovered exactly what Amanda had meant by what comes next. It started with a series of negative reviews flooding our pre-opening website, all suspiciously similar in tone and content. Then came the anonymous tips to the building inspector about alleged code violations. Each complaint was investigated and dismissed, but the delays were starting to add up. I was dealing with yet another baseless complaint when my project manager Tom burst into my office. We've got a problem, he said, dropping a stack of papers on my desk. Our main supplier just canceled all our orders. Every single one. I picked up the cancellation notice, immediately spotting the reason. Let me guess, they got a better offer. Tom nodded grimly. From a new resort development company. Want to take a wild guess who's behind it? Atlantic Coastal Development, I said, reading the letterhead. Amanda's new company. She had finally shown her hand. By attempting to lock up our supply chain, she was trying to force delays that would trigger penalty clauses in our contracts and potentially spook our investors. She's trying to force us into default, I said, already reaching for my phone. But she forgot one thing. What's that? I smiled, pulling up a contact I'd hoped I wouldn't need. I always have a backup plan. Within hours, I had new suppliers lined up months, I'd vetted months ago as contingencies. It would cost more, but our budget had been built with emergency margins precisely for situations like this. That evening, as I was leaving the office, I found Amanda waiting in the parking lot, leaning against her luxury SUV. Having supply chain issues? She asked sweetly. That must be so frustrating. Not really, I replied, keeping my voice level. We switched to our backup suppliers this afternoon. Construction continues tomorrow as scheduled. Her smile faltered slightly. You know, this could all be so much easier. We could work together. Turn this place into something really profitable. It's already going to be profitable, just not in the quick flip way you're used to. God, you're so stubborn, she exploded. You've always been like this, thinking you know better than everyone else. Well, guess what? This is just the beginning. I've got other plans in motion. I stopped and turned to face her fully. Amanda, I want you to listen very carefully. I have documented every threat, every interference, every attempt to sabotage this project. One more move against this resort, and I'll be forced to take legal action. She laughed, but I could see uncertainty in her eyes. You wouldn't dare. We're family. Family doesn't try to destroy each other's dreams. Family supports each other, but you've never understood that, have you? I understand business, she snapped. And this isn't business. It's you trying to prove something. No, I said quietly. This is me honoring our grandfather's legacy while building something for the future. If you can't see that, then you never really understood what he was trying to teach us. As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Amanda's threats weren't empty. She had always been relentless when she felt wronged, and in her mind, I had stolen her opportunity. My suspicions were confirmed the next morning, when our head contractor called with disturbing news. Someone had accessed the construction site overnight and tampered with several pieces of critical equipment. Nothing was seriously damaged, but the message was clear. I immediately called an emergency meeting with my security team and lawyers. Within hours, we had new security protocols in place and surveillance cameras installed throughout the property. I also filed a police report, making sure to include the history of threats and interference. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visit from our father. We need to talk about Amanda, he said, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. She came to me asking for money to start a competing development. I leaned back in my chair, not entirely surprised. Let me guess, she wants to build right next door. He nodded. She says she can undercut your prices, steal your market share before you even open. And what did you tell her? I told her no. He met my eyes steadily. For the first time in her life, I told her no. The significance of this wasn't lost on me. Our father had always been Amanda's biggest supporter, her go-to source for funding every new scheme. She didn't take it well, he continued. Said some things. Well, she showed a side of herself I've never seen before. I've seen it, I said quietly. Every time something doesn't go her way. The difference is now everyone else is seeing it too. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the construction progress. You know, your grandfather once told me something about you. He said you had the patience to build something real, something lasting. Said Amanda was all flash and no foundation. But you understood what it meant to create something worthwhile. Why didn't you ever tell me this before? He turned back to me, his expression regretful. Because I was too busy being dazzled by Amanda's big ideas. I forgot that the biggest ideas aren't always the best ones. Just then, my phone buzzed with an alert from security. The cameras had picked up Amanda trying to access the construction site through a back entrance. I have to deal with this, I said, standing up. Are you with me on this, Dad? Because what comes next won't be easy. He nodded slowly. Do what you have to do. It's time Amanda learned that actions have consequences. As I watched the security footage of my sister being escorted off the property, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep sadness for what our relationship had become. But I also knew that sometimes, protecting what you're building means standing firm against those who would try to tear it down. The next day, my lawyers sent Amanda a formal cease and desist letter, along with evidence of all her attempts to sabotage the project. The message was clear. One more move against the resort would result in legal action. For the first time in our lives, I had drawn a line she couldn't cross. The question now was whether she would finally accept it, or if this was just the calm before an even bigger storm. The grand reopening of Ocean View Resort was scheduled for a perfect summer evening, exactly 1 year after I'd taken control. The restored property gleamed in the golden sunset, every detail precisely as I'd envisioned. Press, local dignitaries, and industry leaders filled the lobby, all eager to see the transformation everyone had been talking about. I stood at the podium, preparing to give my speech, when I spotted Amanda slipping in through the back. She wasn't on the guest list, but security had been instructed to let her in if she appeared. This was, after all, still a family matter at its heart. Ladies and gentlemen, I began. 50 years ago, my grandfather built this resort with a vision of creating something that would last generations. Today, we're not just reopening a hotel, we're continuing a legacy. As I spoke, I could see my mother wiping tears from her eyes, my father standing proud beside her. Even some of our old staff members who'd returned for the reopening were nodding in approval. The easy path would have been to tear this place down, to build something quick and profitable. But that wasn't my grandfather's way, and it's not mine either. Success isn't just about the bottom line. It's about building something meaningful, something that stands the test of time. I noticed Amanda shifting uncomfortably in the back, perhaps recognizing her own rejected plans in my words. After the speech, during the reception, Amanda approached me on the terrace. She looked different, subdued, almost uncertain. "This is impressive," she admitted, gesturing at the restored resort. "I didn't think you could pull it off." "That was always the problem," I replied. "Nobody did." She was quiet for a moment, watching the guests mingle inside. "The Henderson Group called me yesterday. They're pulling out of my development project." "I heard." "Of course you did." She managed a small smile. "You always know everything, don't you? Always 3 steps ahead." "Not always. I just plan better." She turned to face me fully. "I've been offered a position with a development firm in Chicago. I'm taking it." The surprise must have shown on my face because she laughed softly. "Don't worry, it's legitimate. Actually, it's entry level. They want me to learn the business from the ground up, like grandfather always said we should." I noted. Yeah, maybe he knew what he was talking about after all. We stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the reception drifting out to us on the evening breeze. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "For everything. The sabotage, the threats. I was jealous. You built something real here, while I was just playing at being a businesswoman. You could build something real too, Amanda. You just need to do the work first." She nodded, then reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "Here are my shares in the resort. I want you to have them. You don't have to." "Yes, I do. You've earned them. Besides," she smiled wryly, "I need to focus on learning the business properly before I try running one again." Inside, I could see our parents watching us through the window, hope evident on their faces. Maybe this was what they'd always wanted, their children finally finding their own paths, even if they weren't the ones anyone had expected. "Good luck in Chicago," I said, extending my hand. She surprised me by pulling me into a hug instead. "Good luck with the resort. Though I don't think you'll need it." As she walked away, I looked up at the resort. My resort now, fully and completely. The lights were coming on as dusk settled, and I could see guests already enjoying the renovated rooms, the restored restaurants, the modernized amenities that somehow managed to enhance rather than detract from the historic charm. My grandfather had built this place on a foundation of hard work and attention to detail. I'd restored it the same way. And now, looking at the results, I knew he would have been proud. The resort's bell chimed softly in the evening air, the same bell my grandfather had installed 50 years ago, now restored to its original glory. Some things, I realized, don't need to be completely transformed. Sometimes they just need someone to remember their value and help them shine again. I rejoined the reception, where Mr. Davidson from Pacific Coast Holdings was already talking about expansion opportunities. But that could wait. Tonight was about honoring the past, while celebrating the future, and finally knowing, without any doubt, that I had chosen the right path.